I think having agency in your life is the most important. It's more important than money and passport stamps and trips and experiences. And so having the freedom to choose what I do and what I show up for is the most important thing. And I have to listen to that gut feeling of why I don't want to show up. What is in that conversation, the role that isn't firing me up? And I have to be honest with myself. And sometimes that's very hard to do, especially you're wanting to do more, but maybe not do that part. You have to be reminded that you want to go in a direction that's aligned with you.
I'm Alex Yang, and this is the How I Decided podcast, the show where regular people share important decisions they've made so that we can make better decisions in our own lives and also figure out what we want from our lives and how we want to live our 20s.
How I Decided.
And if you're new to the How I Decided podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify, and also on Instagram so that you can stay up to date on the newest episodes and spread the word about the importance of decision making in our 20s. My guest today is Kelly Davis. Kelly Davis is an experienced global educator and edtech co-founder with 14 years of experience in blending Eastern and Western educational approaches. Kelly worked as an elementary school and international school teacher in Korea and Taiwan before co-founding Kubrio, one of the world's most progressive online self-directed schools spanning over 30 countries. Kelly currently works as a skilled learning coach for students ages 14 to 21, an education consultant for education professionals, and a fractional COO for startups. Kelly and I met several years ago when I was heads down doing research in the edtech space, and I reached out to her wanting to learn more about her company. Since then, I've caught up with Kelly, and I've been really interested by two things. One, her moving to Portugal a few years ago, and two, the various projects she's been working on since moving on from her startup. In our conversation, Kelly and I talk about what it's like to move to foreign countries, adapt to new environments, and find community, how creating a values workbook informs what kind of work you do and the professional choices you make, and finally, how having a career with multiple projects compares to a career where you just have one full-time job. Kelly is a pioneer in the global education scene, and it's such an honor to have her on my podcast. Now, on to today's show. The way I want to start off is actually at the beginning. You became an educator in Asia, and I wanted to ask you how you decided to make that choice, especially given, we actually grew up like 20, 30 minutes from each other in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So what made you decide on Asia?
Yeah, great question. I think it's funny that we come full circle and also haven't met in person yet since we've known each other online for all these years. But I guess the reason I decided to move to Asia was because I wanted to teach English. And I heard about this from friends that I was studying abroad with when I lived in Australia. So I'll take it one step backwards. I was in a small university in the middle of Pennsylvania, and I worked at the study abroad office as an intern in the summer. And I found out about this university in Australia where I had the opportunity to go do an internship there. So that was the last semester of my bachelor's degree in university. And it was an amazing experience going to Australia, living in the land of kangaroos. And it was called the University of Sunshine Coast. So it was a really cool experience. And there I met some friends who had previously taught English in South Korea as well. And so they said, hey, do you know you can teach English in South Korea or in Asia in many different countries? And so that was where I heard about it. And a year and a half later, I was there. In between then, I went backpacking in Southeast Asia. And so I had the chance to experience what Asia was going to be like potentially and live there and meet people who had already lived there. So I wanted to dip my toes in before moving there. I started with 2 years in South Korea, and then I was in Taiwan for the last 8 years as well. So a total of 10 years.
And at the time, I guess, before you had even moved there or anything, did it feel like it was a risky decision to you? Or did you feel like maybe because you had known and spoken to people who already did it, it felt like there was some sort of knowledge that it was going to be not that risky of a decision?
I think when I was young, and I probably definitely have that mindset still as I've moved to many places since then, that it's not that risky to move because it can be much easier than you think to get set up. But I say that very lightly. Having just moved to Europe, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And I think those experiences have taught me that once you throw yourself into the deep end, it does pay off, and it is worth the challenge. Moving to Korea was quite hard. The first year of my teaching experience there was very difficult. I was the only foreigner in my school, only foreigner in my town on the very east side of Seoul. And I wasn't really interested in continuing that. But then I met people who had different experiences. And the second year, my school had 15 foreign teachers, and I lived with roommates and really changed my experience around. So it's more about meeting people and knowing that you can trust them and their experiences and try something new. And that's where you'll grow as well.
Absolutely. I mean, as someone like me, for example, I've lived in the same house basically my entire life, and then I went to undergrad 1 hour away from where I grew up. So even the concept of moving from one apartment to the other, like a couple avenues down in New York, was a bit scary to me. But it sounds like it's something that you just develop this mindset of being willing to meet new people and adapt. And I'd also love to just ask you and to get a little into this about how you got through that challenge in Korea. Like you mentioned, more foreigners came in, but during that time when it was just you, like how did you deal with that and get through that time?
Yeah, great question. I guess the hardest part for that wasn't resolved by meeting other foreigners. I was in Korea. I wanted to immerse myself there, but I was completely isolated. It felt like, and so when you move to a place like Korea, your job is connected to your visa, and then they set you up with an apartment, and that's all. And so you don't meet people if you don't work with people because your apartment, your boss knows where you live, and it's very close to the school, and it's all connected. And I think the way that I got through that, actually, it's a funny story. I was in the subway station and I saw these other potentially English teachers, other foreigners, and I walked up to them and I said, "Hi, do you live around here?" And they were these very two nice women. And I said, "Do you live around here?" And they said, "Yeah, not that far away." I said, "Do you work around here?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, I'm looking for people that that live around here. And I was there for probably a month at that point and hadn't met anyone. I would see people in the grocery store occasionally and be like, "Oh, maybe they live around here," and would be interested in meeting other English teachers there. So these two people became my closest friends through my time in Korea. So they ended up living and working at a school nearby and becoming close friends of mine. And that was just it. You just have to put yourself out there and like solve your own problems. And so I walked up to people and said, "Hi, can we hang out?" And that was it.
Yeah. Was that something new for you? Like was that kind of your natural mindset, or is that something you just had to force yourself to do and learn and get better at it?
I would say it's a bit of both, but in a foreign country, it was a bit of survival, it felt like. So it was like, I have to meet people and I have to put myself out there. And after meeting them and knowing that they work at a school, it's not 100% wonderful all the time. And we have similar things that we can work through in our professional lives as well as our personal lives, and just have a community that would start to build. I think the challenging part from that was doing that when I was young and then growing up, I'll say growing up and moving more recently, it felt like a very big difference when I would say that I'm not in my 20s anymore and I'm not going to the same type of social events that I would as I was when I was younger. So that kind of changed things. And for example, like fast forward, I'm here in Lisbon now and I have a walking group. So that's how I created community aligned with something that I enjoy once moving here. So
Yeah. I think if I had to guess, like a big part of maybe why you say it's easier than people think to go to the places you don't realize like the community that's out there and the people that you can meet and stuff. And I've experienced the same thing going to grad school now, where actually when I was considering making the decision, a lot of it had to do with things like academics or sports or tennis, like those parts of what I was going to do, and less, I think I under indexed about all the people that I was going to meet there inevitably, and also those relationships for for the rest of my life. So it's like we sometimes forget about like the people that were able to meet there. Maybe because it's just harder to visualize what that means for us and for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, there's an element of meeting new people. I find from changing locations multiple times is that we've all been there at one point in our lives. So you're just remembering what it was like to be the new person, the new kid in the class. The same thing as like the new kid in the group. So having that empathy for new people and always evolving in these relationships. So finding those people and finding what you're aligned with is important.
So I want to talk about the next step in your Iranian career. You kind of moved along from being an educator in Asia to an edtech startup founder. I wanted to know like what was the motivation behind doing that?
Great question. So after I was in Korea, then I went to Taiwan. I was working in all different public and private schools of all ages, as well as doing one-on-one tutoring the whole time. So after I got the experience at an international school, I had other friends that were working at other international schools. There's like different tiers. And so I got an insight of what it would be like to be at the tier one international school down the street. If I went on to continue to teach internationally and move around the world in that capacity. And it felt like this turn of time where the internet was turning more into an online learning space. And this was back in 2018. So long before it really got big, and was questioning what it would be like to work at that school, work at schools like that, tier one schools around the world. Not only is it a full-time role, it's a full-time plus your extracurricular coach and weekend events because it's such a tight community. And it is really a full-on position. So having that insight, I was kind of doing more yoga at the time and becoming more active. And I wasn't really finding a way to do both. And to be honest, it was hard to stay healthy and have a full-time job and to have a life and feel that balance. And so I was pulling back. I left the school at the time. There was 10 out of 11 teachers who left the school at the same time. So it was a 3-year experience there that was very interesting and challenging, and was happy to have the experience. But yes, we all left at the same time. So that says a lot. And I went on to continue tutoring and just to see what I could do online. And that's where I started exploring what curriculum design and working with small startups would look like in a freelance basis. So I did tutoring and freelancing and then met my co-founder online. And that's when I was the educator side and he was the parent side. And we were solving a problem in the alternative education space for homeschoolers.
Can you describe to me maybe like the moment when you knew that you wanted to dedicate yourself full time to this startup, this venture?
It happened very fast and it evolved in a way that I would have never expected, could have never predicted. Even looking back now, it's like, wow, that happened very fast. When we first met, we decided to, the job posting that I applied for was an online educator role. So I was going to train up and teach cybersecurity to a high school. That quickly evolved into a research and development project called the Homeschooling Global Summit, where I sought out the leaders of homeschooling communities from all around the world. So we had 50 speakers come and we interviewed them for an online summit. And this was the beginning of the school. I don't think I realized that at the time as well. It was like, let's find out what all these homeschooling communities need and let's interview all of these people. There were about 4,000 people who attended. So it was a really great turnout. Sir Ken Robinson was the headliner. And after that summit, we invited all of the speakers' children to an online book club, which I ran. And the students chose Harry Potter. And that was the first club at the school. And then we had 3 clubs and some like stand-up meetings that we did. And we ran that for 6 months with 20 students. And that's how we got started. And it really just grew from there.
So it sounds like in an unexpected way, you didn't even know that you were building this company up, and then things started to happen and progress. And from what I've heard about my older mentors, like that's how a lot of things happen in life. It's just you don't even realize what you're building up towards. So that's really great to hear. Since then, you've moved on from your startup to now moving to Europe and Portugal, like you said, and doing all sorts of different roles, from being a learning coach, fractional COO, writing mentor, consultant. I want to start with first, actually. So Portugal, like why there? Was this something you did a lot of research into? Was it you heard from other people?
Yeah, we were always thinking of Europe. After 10 years in Asia, we tried to move to another place in Asia and then COVID hit. So it was turning into where else can we go? And it felt like as I was in the startup world, I didn't have anyone in my community locally. I lived in the south of Taiwan in a smaller city. And there were no entrepreneurs or people that were doing different things other than teaching English that I was connected with at that time. So I was traveling to Taipei a lot, joining online communities, and really trying to understand what the next step would look like and where people were in the world. And so Chiang Mai, Thailand is popular, and Lisbon got on the map around that time. There were a lot of families in the online school that were also moving to Portugal. So I caught the buzz about this through a lot of different online communities that I was a part of. Found out about the visa and how it would be possible for me and my partner to move here. And it turned into quite a long process, but worth every second. We came here for what we call a scouting trip. So we came for 3 months to see if we like it. Went home, which happened. We have to go back to North America to get the visa. And a year and a half later, we got a residency and live here now full time. So it was a decision that kind of found out about and did enough research to find out that it would be possible, and loving every part of the culture and the society, and really immersing into that life here so far.
And so now we've talked about you moving to Asia and now Portugal. What would you say you've learned or are your biggest takeaways about being somewhere new and adapting to this new environment, this new culture?
If I were to tell someone who was thinking of moving somewhere, I would tell them to do it. Just do it. Very unpredictable what it's going to be like on the other side. And I can tell you that as much research as I've done before moving to places, the reality of it is there once you're living it, right? So a 3 month scouting trip is nice, but there's also called the honeymoon period, right? So when you eventually do move here, those first next 3 months are going to be great too. And then the reality sets in, and then you try to do some legal things that deal with bureaucracy, and maybe you get some pushback at the post office because you can't speak the language yet, for example. So there are some things that happen in reality, and it's not to sugarcoat the experience to say like, oh, it's great, come here. I think if you're up for the challenge and up for growth, then it's a good experience. And I will say that as far back as studying abroad in university. And I did that because I visited my cousin who was studying abroad in Ireland. And I saw, oh, wow, she's studying abroad. I can do that. That's a cool experience. Having those experiences and have told me that it's worth it. And what I work with now with teenagers and work with them on that adaptability, because it is one of the most important skills that you can show up in a place and get around and exist there. So it's very important.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't even realize maybe that they have this ability to be adaptable because they haven't had this experience or of trying it out, and maybe they give themselves less credit for it than they actually do. I want to also talk now about the work that you're doing in Portugal. So could you maybe give a rundown of what you're currently working on, what you've done in the past, and maybe what else is there that you'd like to pursue?
So since leaving Kubrio, it's been about a year and a half. I would say an education consultant looks like many hats. I call myself education consultant and learning coach. And the things that fall under that have been a variety of instructional design, working with curriculum development, and this is for some higher ed companies as well as K to 12 institutions. And it's been really exciting to kind of see a lot of different angles. So building courses and doing some fractional COO work. So I know some of my strengths are in operations and rolling up my sleeves and getting the overview and setting it up and making it happen. So it's a mixture of both. I would say I also do some executive assisting, and as a learning coach, what I love to do is the building side. I find that definitely lights me up to be in something that's early and exciting and developing, and be part of the idea and the decisions early on. and as well as the operations side, like I said. So it is a mixture of both. And I think there are some exciting projects out there on the horizon that I'm really looking forward to diving in deeper over the next few months. But I also work as a writing mentor on and off for Rite of Passage when the cohort is live. And having a writing community is a way that I bring this all together and stimulate the ideas that I have around what I do between walking in Lisbon in one newsletter and the edtech work I do.
So would you say there's just this underlying thread, I guess, into all these projects that you do?
100%, yes. It's been a year of alignment, I would say. So finding things that really fire me up to say, oh hell yeah, I'll be there. I'm gonna do that and we're gonna make that great. Whereas things where I try to follow my gut, if I'm something's holding me back, if I'm delaying a reply or whatever it could be, to have that way to understand how I would be treated once inside and once getting to that. This comes from a lot of the experiences I've recently had. So I want to make sure the alignment is there, that people are kind, we see each other as humans. I think that's very important. At the end of the day, we're working on building something. It's a business and we need to make money, but we're also human, and there is a side behind the screen that we need to just pay attention to.
I think this is a really exciting topic for me to listen about. And you talk about alignment. So in a previous conversation we had, you talked about your values workbook. I would curious to know, like, how does that exercise help you with finding things to do and ways to spend your time that align with your values?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I love this conversation because it was a helpful practice for me back when I started as a co-founder. And it was the work I was doing with a coach. So I had a coach, and she was aware of what it was like to be an expat as well as work at startups. And so with this experience, she really helped me to understand what was important to me through a bit of practice and different exercises. And what I took away from this, kind of, I would say one of the first days as I walked away from that company, is that I created this values workbook to help me decide what was important to me. And I see them as different buckets. And these buckets are, even in its most detail, they are color coded. And on my calendar, those colors are matching those goals. So my health is the number one value to me. If I'm not healthy, how can I show up and build something that's awesome? And then the second one is relationships. So I have this walking group. They're often part of the health goal, right? It's all connected. My family, my friends, the people that are there for me. And then the third one is growth. So my work, the work I do, and having that importance there, and so on and so forth. You can see the values workbook. I have it free on Gumroad. It's part of a small batch. I'm in a group where we create small projects. I have a bunch of workbooks there, but and different resources. But this resource has also helped me with my students as a learning coach. And I think it's important that you know why you're showing up, what's your purpose, and what it's all connected to. So there's a quote that I grabbed from the minimalists, and they say, your short term actions meet your long term values. So I think there has to be some alignment in what you do, and who you do it with is important.
I love how it's, you know, those values are connected to what you're doing and what's on your calendar. And I think I, in my experience in college and just learning in general, I think that values word is something that comes up a lot, and people are like, oh, you should know what your values are, and that's going to allow you to make the right choices, or maybe not necessarily the right choices, but the choices that you want to give yourself the life that you want. And but it's like rarely, I think, ever mentioned like an explicit set strategy to organize those values or have them in a way where you can be constantly reminded of them. So it's really, I think, refreshing to hear specific strategy from you, how you're, able to organize that in a way that makes sense. Because the one thing that I've struggled with is, okay, I know my values, like it's great. Maybe it's like on a list somewhere, or maybe someone has it on their phone, but like how does that connect to what you're doing in your everyday life so that you know exactly what you're doing is going to support those longer term values, like you mentioned, which is hard. Something I'm also curious about in this time in Portugal for you is, how does this life of having different projects and other stuff on the horizon compare to, say, being completely heads down with one job, maybe like one classroom or one startup that you're working on?
I like that question. For me, it's freedom. I think having agency in your life is probably for me, it's the most important. It's more important than money and passport stamps and trips and experiences. And so having the freedom to choose what I do and what I show up for is the most important thing. And like I said, I have to listen to that gut feeling of why I don't want to show up. What is in that conversation, the role that isn't firing me up? And I have to be honest with myself. And sometimes that's very hard to do, especially you're wanting to do more, but maybe not do that part. You have to be reminded that you want to go in a direction that's aligned with you. So it's a lot of trial and error. And I think having a supportive network of people who know you and say, "Hey, I'm going through this." I was just having a conversation earlier about something similar like this, and it's just a reminder that we have to stay true to ourselves. That's who we want to be in the long term, and we can coach and cheerlead on our best friend and tell them to like say no and set your boundaries, and but we do that not as easily to ourselves.
So it's a bit of you have the freedom and agency to choose what you want to do, but what that also means is you're going to have to maybe turn down some stuff or say no. Do you maybe have a specific example of maybe where your gut was telling you no, or you're feeling a certain reaction?
Yeah, when I first left Kubrio, there was a bit of a pattern I saw in some of the conversations I was having. So on my website, I have a free consultation and like to explore brainstorming ideas often. So I would get some requests in some type of AI or maybe cybersecurity and definitely heavy in the tech space that were interested in building something in education. And they potentially just had a child at a very small age, before school age, let's say before 3 years old. And they would download some educational apps and they would see what learning was like on these apps and say, no, with my experience in tech and my child's not going to learn like this. And I have an idea. I'm going to solve this problem. So there were a lot of early ideas that I was hearing about from people like this. I would say upwards of 5 to 10, anywhere from reading apps, spelling apps to homeschooling AI resource guides and everything in between. So it was a very interesting time to explore this in the early stages, but I was definitely not ready to jump into anything.
Yeah, I think the challenge with, I guess, this life you're living now is with that agency, you have to make these kind of different stakes decisions about, okay, like how do I really want to spend your time? Maybe compared to someone who has this corporate 9 to 5, they know exactly what they're going to be doing. I think a lot of, at least where I grew up, at least a lot of us didn't realize that there's a career that you can have where you're not just working one job every single day, right? There are different projects or side hustles that you can pursue. That was never something I realized until I got into blog writing myself or working on this podcast. And I think it's important for people to know that it's perfectly okay to have multiple interests and different things that you're pursuing simultaneously. And I think we give ourselves less credit for our ability to be able to do those things in tandem. I don't know if you have a similar feeling or thoughts about that.
Yes, I have lots of thoughts. I think it comes from like, yes, I moved internationally for a job, but now I am a consultant and do a lot of different things and also live abroad. So there's definitely an intersection there I see in a lot of communities. And I always believed as well that I would live in the same town, and just like people desired for so long, and to just continue doing that onward. And it wasn't really until, like I said, I went to visit my cousin who was studying abroad and got a worldly perspective. And that wasn't the only thing, but there were a lot of things that would give me a worldly perspective and to understand that there was more out there to be discovered. And so I started to get curious. And I didn't really have this curiosity in me. I would say it really came out, like you said, when I started writing. And so one of the early prompts in my first writing cohort was about what is something you believe in. And it helped me to construct this thought that learning never ends. And I think it's an idea that I stick with and align with, that we're always evolving and we're always learning. And I was fed this idea that you would get the piece of paper, you'd get the degree, and you'd get the job, and you'd hopefully stay there for till the end until you didn't want to anymore, as long as you could. And I don't think that's true. And I think it's a little bit dangerous to think that you would be stuck to one thing and that this person has the over you. And I didn't want to give that up, right? So I got this experience as a tutor and started to work, like you said, side projects and side hustles and say, hey, could I do more of that? But like I said, I was in Taiwan and there was no one in my local community doing this. And so in these online communities, there's rite of passage, but I'll also talk about the pathless path. And it's a book by a man called Paul Millard. And it's a really good insight into redefining the path is like, what the desired path looks like and why we're fed this idea. And he's coming out with a second book. I believe it's around the idea of good work. And it really defines what's the work we want to do and the good work that we show up for. So I'm excited for that. But I think staying in these communities to know that, yes, there's not a lot of people who do this, but you're not alone. And this is worth it for me. It's paid off. It has made me very happy in my life to be here. And it's by my choice, right? And so I know that I can choose what I want to do, and hopefully to some extent, right? And it really helps me to know that there's communities out there and more people pushing the boundary into this societal norm.
Thank you, Kelly. You also introduced me to the Pathless Path recently, so that's something I've been following and reading and listening to the podcast about as I try to work on this one. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being on the podcast. I remember you inviting me actually to the one that you had on Kubrio. That was a while ago, but I feel like it's come full circle now.
Yeah, I was thinking about that actually. Didn't I interview you? Yeah. So exciting. Thanks, Alex. Thank you so much. I really look forward to the rest of your episodes. It's an exciting topic to learn how people make good decisions in their lives.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode with Kelly Davis. A few of my takeaways are when it comes to moving to a new place or a foreign country, it's not going to be easy at first, and we really have to be willing to put ourselves out there. And once we put ourselves out there and talk to people, we're able to meet new people and build community. And that becomes a really rewarding part of the experience of moving somewhere new. And as Kelly explained, it really teaches you to be adaptable. And I think that's a really important skill for all of us. Second takeaway is a values workbook is a great strategy that you can use to understand what's really important to you and how you want to spend your time. And I think this was especially important for Kelly as now she's pursuing multiple projects and roles. So she really has the agency to choose what she wants to do and what activity she feels is supporting her values. My last takeaway is that for Kelly's story, she has this life now where she's pursuing multiple projects. And she also had a career where she was just doing one job, working her startup or working as a teacher. And when you're working multiple projects, you can gain a lot of agency to choose what you want to do. But on the flip side of that, what that also means is that you have to say no to projects as well. And I think it's something that we kind of have to continue to explore, which is how we want to set boundary for ourselves. For Kelly, she mentioned that she would listen to her gut, and that would kind of tell her why she wasn't really feeling fired up about something. And I'm sure there are other strategies out there for how people decide whether to say no to something. But I think what's also important to note about that is that if there's something that feels uncomfortable to you, I think what Kelly has really found in her career so far is that there are tons of communities out there of people that you can talk to, right? People who maybe like you are working on multiple projects and have side hustles, people who are in the education space, like when Kelly was in Asia, and talking to those people can help you realize that you're not alone and also give you some clarity about, what you want to do, what you want to say no to, what you want to spend time on. So really enjoyed today's episode with Kelly. And as always, please let me know if you know anyone who you think would be a great guest for How I Decided.